My backpack hit the floor with a hollow thud. A framed photo of me and Jenna stared back, her grin plastered and bright, so unlike the forced curve of her lips the day she packed her own bags. Filled with my old t-shirts she swore she slept better in. I shoved the photo face down. Not exactly the mindset for a spring break blowout, but hey, neither was a 3-year relationship ending because we were simply agonizingly done.
Dude, you okay?
Ben's voice crackled through my headphones. Peachy, I mumbled, tossing a pair of faded swim trunks on top of the photo. Ben wouldn't get it. He thrived on schedules, on knowing his coffee order would be exactly the same every morning. Me? I felt like I'd swallowed a swarm of bees buzzing, a bit nauseated and desperate for something to change the hum.
Acapulco's gonna blow your mind,
Ben said.
Parties, girls, the works. It's exactly what you need.
Was it? I doubted it, but a week spent lying on my couch analyzing every wrong turn in my and Jenna's relationship seemed like a worse option. 2 flights and a teeth-rattling bus ride later, the word overwhelming didn't even begin to cover it. Acapulco was an explosion. Walls splashed with screamingly bright murals, music blasting from every doorway. The scent of frying spices and something sweet I couldn't name, hanging thick in the air. It was like all my senses were being deep-fried, and I couldn't decide if it was the best or worst thing ever. Probably a bit of both, if I was honest. Like me right then, caught between the relief of being out of my apartment and the gut-knotting knowledge that I was in way over my head. A voice cut through the din.
Lost, amigo?
I spun around. A guy leaned against a wall, arms crossed over a faded Nirvana t-shirt. Not your typical spring break meathead with his gelled hair and sunburn. This guy had a mop of dark curls and eyes that seemed to see a little too much. Like maybe he could tell I'd spent the bus ride fighting the urge to Google how to get your ex back at every Wi-Fi hotspot. Just taking it in, I managed, trying to sound cooler than I felt. He grinned, and damn if something about that grin didn't untwist something in my chest.
It's a lot, yeah? I'm Diego.
The introductions tumbled out. He was a local transplant from Australia, worked as a bartender, knew all the best spots. None of it was the typical Cancun pickup stuff I half expected. He just seemed genuine, I guess. And after months of feeling like I was on autopilot, genuine was kind of intoxicating.
This place.
He gestured towards a doorway choked with bougainvillea.
Best tacos this side of the Pacific.
Bet I can't handle the heat, I retorted, the old, familiar spark of a challenge glinting in my eyes for the first time in weeks.
Oh, I think you'll surprise yourself.
Diego winked. He wasn't wrong about the tacos. Between the eye-watering salsa and my third ice-cold beer, I was starting to see the appeal of blowing off some steam. Not in the tequila-soaked frat boy way I'd imagined, but this was different. Diego wasn't just showing me generic tourist traps. We wandered winding alleys, stumbled into a tiny bookshop filled with yellowing paperbacks, and ended up on a hidden cove, waves crashing in a rhythm that nearly drowned out the thudding of my own heart. It was as we sat on the moon-washed sand, the night a salty blanket around us, that things got weird.
See that house?
Diego pointed to a sprawling villa clinging to the cliffside.
Some cartel bigwig owns it. Cops don't even come up here.
He said it casually, but something in his tone tightened just for a second. A cartel house? It felt about 1,000 miles away from Jenna's complaints about me never scheduling the oil change on time. Yet there was a weird thrill to it, a prickle of danger that was both off-putting and magnetic. Think I need to stick to the beach party, I joked, the words coming out a little shakier than intended. Diego's laugh was surprisingly warm.
Suit yourself, gringo. But there's more to this city than what they show in the brochures.
Just when I thought I was starting to get a handle on this whole Acapulco experience, Diego stood abruptly, a flicker of something I couldn't read crossing his face.
Gotta run.
He muttered, the easygoing vibe of the night suddenly shattered.
Catch you around.
The beach bar, where Diego led me, wasn't so much a bar as it was a collection of sun-bleached plastic tables shoved into the sand and a cooler overflowing with beer. A bonfire blazed, throwing off a heat that rivaled the day's scorching sun. And around it a crowd swayed to a rhythm that felt more instinctual than choreographed. "This your usual spot?" I asked, yelling slightly over the thrum of drums. Diego nodded, taking a long pull from his beer.
Not on a night like this. Way too many tourists, but sometimes you need the noise to fade away.
There it was again, that hint of something beneath the grin. We found a quietish corner, Diego flagging down a woman, balancing a battered tray piled high with mismatched plates. Tacos again. But these ones were different. Smaller, spicier. A symphony of flavors that exploded in my mouth, even as my eyes watered. The burn was good, though. A kind of reset button after too many all-inclusive resort buffets. Conversation flowed surprisingly easy, even with the fact that Diego and I were from completely different worlds. He told stories of growing up in Australia and spending his summers in Acapulco. Snippets that painted a picture both vibrant and gritty. Kids jumping off crumbling piers into impossibly blue water. Old ladies guarding their fruit carts with eagle eyes. And the ever-present unspoken tension that seemed to hum beneath the surface.
It gets in your blood,
He said with a shrug.
the good and the bad.
I thought about my hometown, the manicured lawns and predictable coffee shops. My world felt sterile in comparison. Later, he took me to a club tucked away in a maze of side streets. No neon signs, just a faded mural and the bouncer who barely glanced our way. Inside, the music wasn't the thumping EDM I was half expecting, but something with pulsing drums and a singer whose voice slid between notes in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It felt intimate, almost forbidden, like watching something private and exhilarating. By the time we strolled back to the beach, the bonfire embers were glowing dully and the crowds had thinned. Salt clung to my skin, and everything felt both hyper-real and slightly dreamlike, which was why, when the silence was broken by angry voices, it took me a moment to register that they were real and not just the echo of the night's relentless soundtrack. Two men were arguing, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit water. It was all in Spanish, too fast for me to follow, but the tone was unmistakable. One man was bigger, looming over the other, hands clenched into fists. Diego stiffened beside me.
Best to keep walking,
He muttered, the easygoing charm gone from his voice. What about, shouldn't we... I fumbled for words. Back home, you called 911, right? But here with the cartel villa and whispered undercurrents. That seemed like a surefire way to escalate an already dangerous situation. Before I could do anything except stand there awkwardly useless, a woman's shriek pierced the night. The bigger man shoved his companion, who stumbled back and fell, hitting the sand with a sickening thud. Then, just like that, they were gone, swallowed up by the night, leaving an echo of violence in their wake.
You see that?
Diego asked, his voice low.
That's Acapulco too. Beneath the pretty lights, it can be rough.
The word hung in the salty night air. Rough. It felt hopelessly inadequate, a bland description to label the throb of fear-laced adrenaline coursing through me. My instinct wasn't to run, but something more complicated, a desperate desire to understand, to see beyond the picture-perfect postcard image. We walked in silence to the edge of my hotel zone, the sudden glare of the resort lights jarring after the intimacy of the night. Thanks for everything. The words felt lame, but what else was there to say? Diego shrugged.
The real Acapulco isn't for every tourist. But if you decide you want another glimpse, just let me know.
Before I could answer, he was gone, blending back into the night. I stumbled into my generic hotel room, buzzing with a mix of exhilaration and something darker. Some unease that wouldn't fade, even with the crash of the waves lulling me into a fitful sleep. I woke up to a head that was either still drunk or developing a killer hangover. a disorienting mix of excitement and a creeping unease I couldn't quite shake. My phone wouldn't even flicker on. The screen blanked despite my frantic tapping. The room phone just emitted a dull dial tone. Dead. That's when I noticed the TV was already on. Some local news channel buzzing in the background. Words like robbery and tourist hotspots jolted me into focus. Images of police tape and worried-looking vacationers flashed across the screen. It was just background noise, though, not the type of thing that could happen to you, right? Yet, as I tried to piece together the night, it came back in flashes. The sharp voices on the beach. The sudden way Diego had disappeared. Had he seen something I hadn't? Known more about those guys than he let on? A part of me, the part that had spent too many nights analyzing Jenna's carefully vague text messages, was screaming at me to be more careful. Just a different world, that's all, I said aloud, trying to convince myself. But the words rang hollow, especially when coupled with the news report and the unsettling quiet of the broken phone lines. The day felt off-kilter from the start. The normally bustling hotel lobby was strangely subdued, and there were more staff than usual huddled together in hushed conversations. It wasn't until I tried to grab breakfast at the poolside restaurant that I got the full picture.
Sorry, sir, room service only today.
The waiter said, apologetic but firm, as he blocked my entrance.
Security measures.
Was all he added when I questioned him. My stomach churned. Not with hunger, but a different kind of sickness. That's when I saw it. A police cruiser, lights flashing discreetly in the side drive. Officers were speaking to a couple who were gesturing wildly, their faces a mix of rage and distress. Another knot tightened in my chest when I realized they were the couple I'd always secretly dubbed the honeymooners, always sickeningly affectionate and perfectly tan. If something bad could happen to them. Back in my room, the news report was the same, just with a higher victim count. I clicked it off, but the images clung to my brain like sticky residue. There I was, alone, cut off, with a creeping suspicion gnawing at me. My night out with Diego? His sudden exit? What if the timing wasn't a coincidence? The sound of knuckles rapping against my door pierced my spiral of worries. I'd half expected room service, but when I peered through the peephole, it wasn't the familiar staff uniform that greeted me. Two men in mismatched suits flashed badges.
Police! Open up!
My stomach dropped. Everything about them was off-kilter. Their badges seemed hastily printed, worn on rumpled jackets instead of crisp uniforms. The taller one had a nervous twitch in his jaw. The other couldn't quite meet my gaze. Every instinct I had, honed over years of being just wary enough in cities to avoid obvious trouble, was screaming at me not to open the door. "Is there a problem, officers?" I called out, trying to inject calm into my voice, but failing miserably.
Routine check, senor. We've had reports of noise complaints.
Noise complaints? Seriously? I racked my brain, coming up blank. There had been the TV earlier, but I'd turned it off a while ago. If anything, the hotel was quieter than usual. "Could you come back later?" I managed, stalling for time. I'm not quite decent. The men exchanged a look, and something dark flickered in the shorter one's eyes.
This won't take long.
He insisted, his voice sharpening.
We need to search the premises.
And that was it. The moment when my simmering fear solidified into icy certainty. These guys weren't cops. They were the reason for the subdued hotel. The hushed whispers in the lobby. The real danger lurking behind the resort's facade. My mind scrambled. The cops wouldn't break down the door, right? But what if they weren't cops? The recent robberies, the uneasy atmosphere, Diego's warnings, it all crashed together in a chilling wave of realization. I had to do something, but what? Then, muffled from somewhere outside the hotel, came the sounds that shifted everything. Pop, pop, two sharp cracks, different from any of the usual Acapulco noises. These ones cut through me, raw and immediate. Gunshots. Instinct took over. Before the fake cops even had a chance to react, I lunged across the room, shoving the dresser against the door with a strength fueled by sheer adrenaline. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy me precious seconds. The pounding on the door resumed, even more insistent now, accompanied by muffled shouts. My scrambled brain registered the words warrant and obstruction, but they were drowned out by the frantic pulse in my own ears. Frantically, I searched the room for any kind of weapon, but all I could think of were the flimsy plastic chairs on the balcony and a half-empty mini-fridge. Useless. Hopeless. That's when I saw it. My laptop, still open on the desk. My phone might be dead, but the hotel Wi-Fi had always been patchy at best. Maybe, just maybe. My fingers flew across the keyboard as shouts escalated to pounding that threatened to split the thin hotel door. I sent a desperate, half-typed message to Sarah via Skype, my closest friend back home. Acapulco, in trouble. Think cops are fake. Send help was all I could manage before the Wi-Fi signal flickered and died. Sarah's panicked reply flashed across the screen just seconds before it went dark. Evan? Cops? What's happening? Staying online. Tell me more. I blinked back tears of frustration. She knew. Someone out there knew. That shred of connection, however tenuous, was the most potent weapon I had right then. It also meant the fake cops couldn't just disappear me without someone raising questions.
Senor, open the door!
The voice was harsher now, the veneer of authority cracking. Taking a deep breath, I stood, hands raised slightly as if in shaky surrender. I wasn't going to make it easy for them, but if I stalled long enough, maybe Sarah could send real help, or hotel security would get wind of the commotion. Maybe there was still a chance. Coming, I called, my voice a pathetic squeak compared to their relentless pounding. Just give me a minute. I could hear them muttering to each other, then the pounding stopped, replaced by an ominous silence. Dread pooled in my stomach. Waiting was torture, but it was the only leverage I had. Maybe they were trying to break down the dresser. Maybe they'd given up and moved on to easier prey. The seconds ticked by, each one a small, agonizing victory. Then, a sharp, insistent chime pierced the room. Sarah. She was trying to get my attention, spamming me with messages. But how could I even risk glancing at the laptop with them, likely still right outside? If only I could warn her. Tell her to contact the authorities, anyone, and not wait. Not give those guys time to regroup. The relentless chiming of my laptop seemed impossibly loud in the tense silence. I spun around, heart pounding. Had the commotion with the fake cops drawn attention? But no, it was more messages from Sarah. A frantic stream of demands for updates, and promises that she was trying to figure out how to get help. I had to respond to warn her, but any movement risked drawing their attention. Suddenly an idea sparked. The hotel. They had to have a record of any legitimate police calls. If I could just contact someone, anyone, in the front desk. Frantically, I typed Acapulco Hotel Concierge into the search bar, praying for a website. One popped up, and with trembling fingers, I scrolled until I found the contact email. My hands shook as I crafted a short, desperate message, disguising the immediate danger in vague terms of a disturbance, and begging for confirmation if any police officers had been dispatched to my floor. I hit send, the click echoing like another gunshot in the room. Now it was a game of waiting, of fighting the urge to dart over to the laptop every few seconds, knowing each glance was a risk. The silence outside the door was suffocating. Too long had passed for them to have simply given up. But what were they planning? Just when I could barely take it anymore, there was a new sound, muffled thudding from the hallway, and raised voices that weren't the fake cops. Someone was calling for security, demanding answers. Perhaps my frantic email had gotten through, or the dresser barricade had held longer than the imposters had anticipated. Whatever the reason, there was chaos outside. It was my chance. Lunging forward, I shoved the bedside table against the door, adding another layer to the barricade. My breath came in ragged gasps as I strained to hear the commotion in the hallway. It was escalating. Another shout, a scuffle that sounded distinctly like someone getting tackled. The fake cops wouldn't wait forever. With shaking hands, I grabbed the laptop and darted it across the room, shoving it under the bed. Just in time. The renewed pounding on the door was almost rhythmic. Boom, boom, boom. It matched the frantic thudding of my own heart.
We have a warrant.
The taller one's voice was strained now, a thin veil over the panic seeping through. I don't understand. I tried to sound confused, scared, anything but the defiant surge of adrenaline coursing through me. What's going on? They ignored me. The pounding intensified. The flimsy wood of the door starting to splinter. Time was running out. Help! I screamed, my voice hoarse. Someone, please help. The words were both plea and gamble. I had to hope someone heard, that hotel security wouldn't dismiss it as a simple drunken disturbance.
Shut up in there.
The shorter one barked the command, and for just a second the pounding paused. Had they been spotted, or were they regrouping for an even more forceful entry? Then a crash from the hallway, angry shouts, the heavy thud of footsteps, and finally, blessedly, the authoritative voice of what sounded like a real security officer.
Police, everyone, stand down!
The fake cops' voices overlapped with protests, and what sounded like a brief struggle. But there was a distinct shift in the energy. The door to my room rattled as someone tested it from the outside. Then a key scraped in the lock. I stumbled back, legs weak as the door was cautiously opened. 2 hotel security guards rushed in, followed by a very official-looking, very real policeman. The room filled with people. The real policeman. 2 more security guards. And a worried-looking woman who I vaguely recognized as the front desk manager. Relief washed over me in dizzying waves. But there was a sharp bite of fear, too. Because this wasn't over. Not yet.
Senor, are you all right? The officer knelt down beside me, his voice gruff but kind.
I nodded numbly. The frantic shouts and the adrenaline crash leaving me shaky and close to tears. Those men, I forced out the words. They weren't police. The officer's gaze hardened.
We suspected as much.
He turned to the security guards.
Did anyone get a good look at their faces? We need to get these guys.
Commotion erupted as other hotel guests spilled into the hallway, drawn by the noise. Whispers and frightened questions filled the air as I was helped to my feet, my knees threatening to buckle beneath me. I was handed over to the hotel manager for an initial statement, while they dusted the flimsy door frame for fingerprints. Sarah's messages were flooding in now, a mix of relief and terror and demands for answers. I fumbled a reply, trying to reassure her that I was alive, if not completely unscathed. It was hours later, long after the hotel hallway had emptied and the insistent beeping of my resurrected phone had subsided, that I was finally given a full picture. There'd been a string of robberies targeting tourists in my area of the hotel. The fake cops were part of it, probably casing rooms and taking advantage of the chaos to overpower unsuspecting victims. They'd almost gotten away clean, too, if it hadn't been for my frantic call for help, drawing attention and throwing a wrench in their plans. One of them was in custody. The other, they weren't sure. There was a chance he'd slipped away in the confusion, and that's when the other shoe dropped. As I sat shakily in the sterile hotel conference room, being offered water I couldn't drink, and apologies that felt hollow, a dark thought slithered into the edges of my exhausted mind. Diego. He knew the city, knew its undercurrents. Had he known about this too? Was this why he'd vanished so abruptly last night? Later still, as the beginnings of dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and grays, there was a hesitant knock on the door. It was him. Diego looked disheveled, the ever-present grin replaced by a weary tightness around the eyes.
I heard,
He said, voice low.
are you okay?
It was a stupid question, of course I wasn't okay. But something about his sincerity cut through my anger. A little warning would have been nice, I managed, and even to my own ears, it sounded pathetically weak. He winced.
I should have... Look, those guys, they were connected to some people I know. Got greedy. I swear I had no idea they were planning that.
His gaze met mine, pleading for understanding.
I'm so sorry, Evan.
Sorry. It was such a small word for how I felt. Betrayed. stupid. My entire body ached, not just from the physical exertion, but from the shattering of a fragile trust that I now saw had been foolishly placed. We talked then, if you could call it that. My words came out clipped and harsh, his replies halting and laced with guilt. The easy connection we'd found was irrevocably broken. When he finally left, it was without promises of meeting again. I left Acapulco a few days later. On the flight home, the once dazzling colors of the city seemed muted. I'd glimpsed behind the sun-drenched facade into a world where danger and beauty existed side by side. And I wasn't sure how to reconcile the two. But amidst the lingering unease, there was something else too. A newfound wariness, perhaps, but also a flicker of something like strength. I had listened to my instincts. I had taken action. It hadn't completely shielded me from the city's darkness, but it brought me out at the other side alive. Jenna, Facebook updates of my friends. Even the routine I'd craved. It all felt absurdly small now. I wasn't sure who the new Evan was, but I knew with a bone-deep certainty that the old one was gone, replaced maybe with someone a bit less trusting, a bit more wary. And perhaps in the long run, that wouldn't be such a bad thing.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches, and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.